a silent camera, a new Maid, disabled Triplet. The moment he pressed play, everything changed. The mansion had been holding its breath for 3 years, and Jennifer had learned to breathe with it, shallow, careful, never too deep. But this morning, something was different. The air felt wrong, too alive, trembling with a sound that shouldn't exist. Laughter. Not just any laughter. The light, unbroken giggles of children who had never made a sound. Jennifer Morel stopped in the center of the hallway, her Prada briefcase slipping from her fingers and hitting the Italian marble with a sharp crack. Her body went rigid, her chest locked. The sound was coming from the playroom at the end of the hall, the room she had begun to avoid because hope hurt too much when it lived in a space filled with silent wheelchairs. She moved forward, her Valentino heels soundless against the floor. Her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. When she reached the doorway, what she saw didn't just stop her. It erased her. James O'Loran, the maid she'd hired only 6 days ago, was kneeling on the soft cream-colored rug, his faded work shirt still damp from cleaning the kitchen. His arms were open, his face glowing with something Jennifer hadn't seen in years, joy that wasn't pretending. And her triplets, Elrond, Itri, and Riva, children who had been medically declared unable to walk, unable to speak. Children whose legs had never held their weight were standing, not leaning, not supported. Standing. Their small legs wobbled like newborn foals. Their hands stretched forward, their faces lit with something Jennifer had forgotten was possible, pure, radiant delight. They were taking steps, tiny, shaky, miraculous steps toward James. Then the sound came, soft, trembling, sacred. Ma, Ma. The voice belonged to Elrond. His mouth, which had never formed a syllable, shaped the word with such gentleness, it felt like a prayer. Jennifer's knees gave out. She grabbed the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Mama. This time it was Itri. His voice higher, uncertain, but real. So impossibly real. And then Riva, her spirited daughter whose silence had always felt the loudest, whispered it too. Mama. Jennifer couldn't breathe. For 3 years, specialists at New York Presbyterian, Johns Hopkins, and the Mayo Clinic had all said the same thing. Their motor neurons are underdeveloped. Their vocal cords show no neurological pathway for speech. Prepare yourself, Mrs. Morel. Some miracles don't happen. But this wasn't preparation. This was devastation. This was resurrection. James had no idea she was there. His entire focus was on the children, his voice gentle and sure, speaking to them like they'd always been whole. That's it. That's it. You're so strong. Say it again. Little lights. Call her. Jennifer stumbled backward before anyone saw her, pressing her palm over her mouth to keep the sob from escaping. She turned and fled down the long hallway, the word mama clinging to her like a ghost she couldn't shake. Her heels clicked against the marble, each step a small, hollow sound in a house that had been built to hold laughter but had only ever echoed silence. The walls were lined with art she'd purchased at auctions, masterpieces that cost more than most people's homes, but every piece felt cold now, lifeless. She had turned this mansion into a mausoleum after her husband's death, after the twins were born, after the diagnosis came. She had replaced grief with control, chaos with order, because if she could just keep everything structured, maybe she wouldn't shatter. But now she was shattering anyway. Jennifer entered her office and sank into the leather chair behind her desk. The mahogany surface cluttered with contracts she couldn't focus on. Her hands trembled as she reached for the gold pen she used to sign million-dollar deals, but she couldn't hold it steady. All she could see was the image burned into her mind. Her triplets, standing, laughing, speaking, reaching for a man they'd known for less than a week. She leaned back and stared at the ceiling, trying to convince herself she'd imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe grief had finally cracked her mind. But no, she had heard them. She had seen them. 3 voices that had never existed, calling out the one word she thought she'd never hear. Jennifer stood and crossed to the tall window overlooking the back garden. From here, she could see the swings that had never been pushed, the treehouse that had never been climbed, the tricycles still wrapped in their original packaging in the storage shed. She had bought all of it before the diagnosis, back when she still believed in futures that looked like other people's lives. Now it sat untouched, a monument to the life her children would never have. Except maybe they would. James Olarun had appeared 3 weeks ago through a staffing agency. The manager said he was reliable, quiet, experienced with children. Jennifer had barely looked at him during the interview. She'd hired 12 people that month: nurses, therapists, nutritionists. One more face didn't matter. He was supposed to clean the East Wing and help lift the children when the nurses needed an extra pair of hands. That was all. But the nurses had mentioned things, small things. The triplets smile when he hums. They turn their heads toward his voice. Riva laughed yesterday when he walked by. I've never heard her laugh before. Jennifer had dismissed it. People saw what they wanted to see when hope was the only thing left. Now she didn't know what to believe. She walked down the hall toward the playroom again. Quieter this time, staying in the shadows. The door was still cracked open. Inside, James sat cross-legged on the floor. The triplets curled against him, their eyes fluttering closed. He was humming something low and rhythmic, a melody that felt old, sacred, like it belonged in a church or a grandmother's kitchen. His hand rested gently on Elron's back, and the boy's breathing slowed, deepened, settled. James wasn't like the people Jennifer usually hired. He wasn't polished or practiced. He didn't speak in clinical terms or offer false reassurances. He was just present. Fully, completely present. The way her late husband Marcus used to be before the car accident took him, before the triplets were born, before everything fell apart. Jennifer's throat tightened. She turned away before James could sense her watching and returned to her bedroom. That night, she lay in the dark, eyes open, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The house creaked and settled around her. The clock ticked. The wind whispered through the trees outside. And beneath it all, one word pulsed like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. Mama. It wasn't just a word. It was a door. A door she thought had been sealed shut forever. Jennifer sat up, her body trembling. She whispered into the darkness, her voice cracking. Marcus, if you're out there, if you can hear me, what is happening to our babies? No answer came. Only the sound of her own breathing, heavy and uneven in the silence. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow, she would talk to James. She would demand to know what he had done, how he had done it, and why her children, medically impossible, diagnostically doomed, had found their voices in the presence of a stranger. What she didn't yet know was that the truth would shatter every wall she had built, every belief she had clung to, every prayer she thought had gone unanswered. If you want to discover what really happened in that playroom, what gift James carried in his quiet hands, and whether Jennifer's faith can survive the miracle she's been begging for, stay with this story. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell me, what do you think lies behind the mysterious bond between James and the 3 children who were never supposed to speak? 3 years earlier, Jennifer's life had looked nothing like this. She had been pregnant with triplets, glowing with the kind of joy that made strangers smile at her in grocery stores. Marcus would rest his hand on her belly every night and whisper promises to the babies, promises about baseball games and bedtime stories and teaching them to ride bikes. They had painted the nursery in soft yellows and greens, hung tiny clothes in the closet, assembled 3 cribs side by side. Then Marcus died. A drunk driver ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon, and Jennifer became a widow at 27, 6 months pregnant and drowning in a grief so heavy she could barely stand. The triplets were born 2 months later, premature and fragile, their tiny bodies fighting for every breath in the NICU. When the doctors finally let her hold them, she wept with relief. They had survived. But 3 days later, a neurologist came to her hospital room with a folder full of scans and a face that told her everything before he spoke. Mrs. Morell, I'm so sorry. The triplets have severe neurological damage. Their spinal development is compromised. They may never walk. Their vocal pathways show minimal activity. Speech is unlikely. Jennifer had stared at him, numb. What does that mean? It means, he said quietly, you should prepare yourself for a very different kind of life. She didn't believe him at first. She hired specialists, flew to clinics in Switzerland and Singapore, spent millions on experimental therapies. Every doctor said the same thing. Every test confirmed the diagnosis. And every night, Jennifer knelt beside the triplets' beds and prayed until her knees left bruises on the hardwood floor. Please, God, please, just let them be okay. Just give them a chance. But the silence stretched. Months became years. The triplets grew, but they didn't walk. They didn't speak. And one night, Jennifer stopped praying. She stood in the nursery, staring at the 3 wheelchairs lined against the wall, and whispered into the darkness, "You're not listening. Or you don't care. Either way, I'm done." She hadn't prayed since, until yesterday. Now, standing outside the playroom door at dawn, Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs. She pushed the door open. James was already there, kneeling beside Elrond, gently massaging the boy's legs. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm, unguarded. "Mrs. Morell," he said softly, starting to stand. "Don't." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "How did you do that? Yesterday? How did they walk?" James met her eyes, and for a moment she saw something flicker there, grief, maybe, or understanding. He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't me, ma'am. Sometimes children just need light. That's all. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Jennifer wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him until he gave her something concrete, something she could hold on to. But instead, she felt tears burning behind her eyes. "They called me Mama," she whispered. "They've never said a word in their entire lives, and they called me Mama." James's expression softened. "They know who you are. They've always known." She didn't trust herself to speak. She turned and left before the tears could fall. Over the next 3 days, Jennifer became a ghost in her own home, watching James from doorways and hallway corners. She saw things that didn't make sense. When he touched Itri's legs, the boy's muscles twitched, subtle, but unmistakable. When he spoke to Riva in a mixture of Yoruba and English, the girl's eyes followed his lips, focused and alert. He hummed a strange lullaby, something low and rhythmic, and all 3 children grew still, their breathing synchronized. Once, she watched him place his hands on Elrond's spine, barely touching, just hovering. The boy's shoulders, usually tight and hunched, relaxed completely. Elrond sighed, a sound Jennifer had never heard him make. The triplets responded to James in ways they had never responded to her, to the nurses, to anyone. Is he a healer? The thought felt absurd. A fraud? But what could he possibly gain from this? A danger? She studied his face, his movements, searching for malice and finding only gentleness. A miracle? She was too afraid to believe that. On the 4th morning, Jennifer entered the playroom early, before James arrived. She needed to understand him. She searched quietly, carefully, not even sure what she was looking for. In the corner, beside his cleaning supplies, she found his worn canvas bag. Inside, a faded rosary with wooden beads, the string frayed from years of use. A small, folded hospital bracelet with a name she couldn't quite read, and a date from 6 years ago. And a notebook, no bigger than her palm, filled with handwriting so small and precise it looked like scripture. She opened it. The pages were covered in prayers. Prayers for children. Prayers for healing. Prayers for light. To find the broken places. Jennifer's hands shook as she closed the notebook and put everything back exactly as she'd found it. Something deeper was hidden beneath James's calm smile. Something sacred and scarred. And she realized, standing there in the quiet playroom, that she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of hope. Jennifer couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, she sat in her office with her laptop glowing in the darkness, typing James Olerun's name into every search engine, every database she had access to. She told herself she was being responsible, protecting her children. But the truth was simpler and more desperate. She needed to understand. The first article she found was an obituary from 6 years ago. Abeni Olerun, age 12, passed away peacefully, surrounded by family after a long battle with cerebral palsy. She is survived by her brother, James, and her parents. Jennifer's breath caught. She clicked deeper, finding fragments of a story scattered across charity websites and local news archives. James had been Abeni's primary caregiver for most of her life. Their parents worked 2 jobs each just to keep the lights on, so James, barely 20 at the time, had learned to feed her, bathe her, carry her from room to room. After she died, he'd volunteered at disability centers across the city for 3 years. He'd even enrolled in a pediatric therapy program at community college, but dropped out after 1 semester. The records didn't say why, but Jennifer could guess. No money, no time, no safety net. She leaned back in her chair, the blue light of the screen washing over her face. James wasn't a charlatan. He wasn't a con artist. He was a man who had loved someone the world overlooked, and that love had shaped him into something she didn't have a name for. At dawn, she found him in the playroom, setting out the triplets' morning medications. She closed the door behind her. He looked up, sensing the shift in her energy. "I know about Abeni," Jennifer said quietly. James froze. For the first time since she'd met him, his calm cracked. His shoulders sagged, and he set down the pill organizer with trembling hands. "How?" I looked. "I had to know who you are." He nodded slowly, not angry, just resigned. "That's not what I see." Jennifer stepped closer. "James, what's happening with my children? Please, I need the truth." He was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. His voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "When Abeni was dying, I was holding her hand. She could barely breathe. But she looked at me and said, 'James, God will use your hands to touch the ones He still wants to heal.' I told her to save her strength, but she wouldn't stop. She made me promise I'd remember." His voice broke. "I didn't understand it then. I still don't fully understand it now. But every time I'm near a child who's suffering, something happens. Not always. Not magic. Just light. Like a door opens somewhere inside them." Jennifer felt her knees weaken. She sank to the floor, not collapsing but surrendering, and the tears came in waves she couldn't control. Not because she was weak, but because hope hurt when it returned. It hurt like blood rushing back into a limb that had gone numb, like breath-filling lungs that had forgotten how to expand. She pressed her palms to the floor and whispered the first prayer she'd spoken in 3 years. "God, if you still hear me, don't stop. Whatever this is, please don't stop." James knelt beside her, not touching, just present. "He never stopped listening, Mrs. Morell. You just couldn't hear him over your own grief." Over the next 2 weeks, the triplets transformed. Elron began lifting his legs during physical therapy, bending his knees, pushing against resistance bands. Eitri formed words, slow and careful, repeating sounds until they became sentences. "I want juice." Riva tried to run, stumbling and laughing, her legs wobbly but determined. The house filled with sounds Jennifer had never thought she'd hear: squeals, giggles, arguments over toys. She called in the specialists, the same doctors who had delivered the original diagnosis. They ran tests, scans, nerve conductivity studies. And then they ran them again, because the results made no sense. Dr. Patel, the neurologist, sat across from Jennifer in the study, his expression caught between awe and confusion. "Mrs. Morell, I don't know how to explain this. The triplets' muscle tone has improved dramatically. Their neural pathways are firing in ways that shouldn't be possible given their initial scans." "What changed?" Jennifer asked, though she already knew. That's what we're trying to determine. We'd like to observe their interactions more closely, particularly with—" He checked his notes. "James Oloran. The nurses say the children's progress accelerates significantly when he's present. They tested it. They brought James into the therapy room and monitored the triplets' biometrics. When he spoke, their neural activity spiked. When he touched Riva's legs, her muscle response doubled. When he hummed that strange lullaby, all three children's heart rates synchronized into a calm, steady rhythm." Dr. Patel removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "We have no medical explanation for this." But Jennifer felt the fear creeping in, even as joy bloomed. If word got out, if the media found out, if people started calling James a miracle worker, everything would collapse. They'd lose their privacy. James would be hounded, exploited. The children would become spectacles. She couldn't let that happen. That night, she stood at the window, watching James walk to his car in the driveway, and felt a terror she hadn't expected. She was afraid of losing him, afraid of losing the miracle, afraid that whatever fragile grace had entered her home would vanish the moment the world found out. The storm came without warning. One moment, the evening was calm, the triplets playing quietly in the living room while Jennifer reviewed documents at her desk. The next, the sky split open with a crack so violent it shook the mansion's foundation. Rain lashed against the windows like fists. Thunder rolled through the walls, deep and primal. Then the lights went out. The entire house plunged into darkness, and for one suspended heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the screaming began. Not crying, screaming. Jennifer bolted from her chair, her heart exploding in her chest. She'd never heard her children scream before. They'd whimpered, they'd cried softly, but this was different. Raw, primal terror pouring out of throats that had learned to speak only weeks ago. She ran toward the living room, her phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. "I'm here! I'm here! Babies! Mommy's here!" Elrond was on the floor, his hands covering his ears, his whole body shaking. Itri had curled into a ball, rocking back and forth. Riva was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, her voice cracking with each gasping cry. Jennifer dropped to her knees and pulled them close, wrapping her arms around all three. "It's okay. It's just a storm. You're safe. I promise you're safe." But they didn't calm. If anything, they screamed louder, pushing against her. Their fear so overwhelming it had become something physical, something she couldn't touch. Then Elrond's voice cut through the chaos, desperate and clear. "Jams!" Itri followed, sobbing. "James! James!" Riva wailed his name like a prayer. "James! Please!" Jennifer's breath stopped. They weren't calling for her. They were calling for him. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands and dialed James's number. It rang once. Twice. "Pick up, please pick up, please. Mrs. Morel." His voice was steady, concerned. "James, the power's out and they're screaming. They won't stop. I can't." Her voice cracked. "They're calling for you. Put me on speaker." She did, holding the phone between her and the triplets. "James is here," she said, her voice trembling. "He's right here." James's voice filled the darkness, low and steady and impossibly calm. The screaming faltered. Elrond's sobs quieted to gasps. "Breathe with me," James continued, his tone like a hand reaching through the storm. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. God's light is here. It didn't go anywhere. The storm can't touch it. You are safe. You are loved. You are held." Itri's crying softened. Riva's breathing slowed. "That's it. That's good. I'm so proud of you. The lights will come back. The storm will pass. And I promise you, you are not alone." Within moments, all three children had quieted, their little bodies still trembling, but no longer panicking. They leaned into Jennifer, exhausted, their tears drying on their cheeks. Jennifer stared at the phone in her hand, her own tears falling freely now. "James, I'm on my way," he said. and the line went dead. She held her children close, rocking them gently, and for the first time in 3 years, the words came without thought, without bitterness, without doubt. God, I see you again. Her voice broke. Thank you for sending him. The storm still raged outside, but inside, something had shifted. The fear had lifted. The darkness didn't feel so heavy anymore. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. James appeared in the hallway, soaked to the bone, his shirt clinging to his skin, water dripping from his hair. He must have run the entire way from his apartment, 3 blocks away. He didn't say anything. He just walked into the living room, knelt beside Jennifer and the triplets, and opened his arms. The children reached for him immediately. He pulled them close, placing his hands gently on their backs, their heads, their small shoulders. He hummed that lullaby, the one Jennifer had heard a dozen times but never understood. And the triplets melted into him, their eyes fluttering closed, their breathing evening out. Within minutes, all 3 were asleep. Jennifer watched, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. She looked at James, this man who had walked into her life as a stranger and become the answer to prayers she'd stopped praying. She knelt beside him, her voice barely a whisper. You weren't sent here as a maid. You were sent as a miracle. James shook his head slowly, his eyes glistening. I'm not the miracle, Mrs. Morrill. I'm just the one who believed they still had light inside them. God did the rest. Jennifer reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Then, thank you for believing when I couldn't. They sat there together in the darkness, the storm beginning to ease outside, the triplets sleeping peacefully between them. And for the first time since Marcus died, since the diagnosis came, since the world fell apart, Jennifer felt whole. In the days that followed, something fundamental shifted in the mansion. The heaviness that had lived in the walls for 3 years began to lift. Jennifer laughed again, real laughter that came from her belly and made her eyes crinkle. She played with the triplets on the floor, sang to them at bedtime, danced with them in the kitchen. James stopped being the maid. He became family. He ate dinner with them. He read bedtime stories. He taught the triplets songs, and they sang back, their voices growing stronger every day. And Jennifer forgave herself. For the anger, for the bitterness, for the 3 years she'd spent convinced that God had abandoned her. She hadn't been abandoned. She'd just been waiting for the kind of miracle that doesn't announce itself with thunder, the kind that arrives quietly, in the form of a gentle man whose hands were chosen long before the pain began. 3 months later, on a bright Sunday morning, Jennifer stood at the kitchen window and watched the impossible. Elrond, Eitri, and Riva were running across the garden, not walking, not stumbling, running, their legs strong and sure, their laughter echoing across the lawn like music the world had been waiting to hear. James was chasing them, pretending to be a monster, his arms raised, his voice playful. The triplets squealed with delight, their joy so pure it seemed to make the sunlight brighter. Jennifer pressed her hand to the glass, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. Sometimes God does not answer with thunder. Sometimes he answers with a man who knows what it means to lose everything and still choose to believe. Sometimes he answers with small steps, quiet words, and hands that carry light in the dark places. Sometimes the miracle isn't that the broken are healed. It's that we learn to see them as whole even before the healing comes. And sometimes the greatest gift God gives isn't the answered prayer. It's the faith to keep praying, even when the silence feels endless. Jennifer whispered one last prayer, soft and sure. Thank you for not giving up on me. Outside, the triplets ran faster, their laughter rising toward the sky like an offering, like proof that grace still lived in the world, that miracles still happened, that light always, always finds a way.